For the past 2 years, the international community has been divided on Syria, mainly because the UN Security Council was paralyzed by differences between the U.S. and Russia. But now it seems the two sides are finding common ground. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have announced a plan to organize an international conference on Syria. For more, I'm joined by Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Welcome back to the show, Ivan. Would you consider this a breakthrough of sorts?
Yeah, of sorts. I mean, I think we have to be a little bit restrained in our exuberance for it, but I think it is definitely a good thing to have this conference because this is the way we need to go. Some settlement needs to be worked out to this conflict because both sides, the two players, the opposition and the Assad regime, they're just going at each other with everything, and I think it's going to continue, and more than 70,000 people have been killed already. So
why now? What do you think has pushed the U.S. and Russia to come to this consensus?
Well, I think a variety of factors. The war seems to be escalating. We have the reported use of chemical weapons, both on the part of Assad, and then some people, the UN negotiator, she said she had evidence that the opposition had used them. We see Israeli strikes, and all those three things, I think, are bringing about the escalation of the situation. And I think that's spurring the Russia and the U.S. who have been on different sides of this conflict, them getting together. And I think also one thing that's very important is the United States, I think, has agreed to, or at least seems to be agreeing to Russia's idea that we shouldn't rule out Assad having some role in any transitional government.
Well, you bring up Assad. So, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, if it gets to the point where this conference, if you will, could engage Assad and his government to come to the table, do you think he would come to the table and maybe open some negotiation?
Well, he may. It depends on the battlefield situation. I think he's been toughing it out pretty well. Certainly his country is under siege, but he has loyal forces, and the people who are fighting with him and he himself, they kind of have their backs to the wall. I think they envision this idea of, they look at Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and they say, we're going to go down if we don't fight hard. But if you could give him some sort of a post-war role, or give him an exile so that he gets some of his relatives and his possessions and that sort of thing, like Saleh in Yemen, he might be willing to take a graceful exit. You can always negotiate with people. Some people don't negotiate, but it's certainly worth a try, and I think this conference is a good idea.
You have Lavrov, you have Kerry coming together. What does this signal to the international community looking at this, and what would need to be accomplished at a conference for it to be successful?
Well, I think both the opposition and Assad would first have to show up, which is unclear at this point. And once you get them in the same room, then you say, well, both Russia and the U.S. are going to have to pressure their respective sides to negotiate, because right now it doesn't look like they're too inclined to do that. And they have to offer them some incentives for doing so. And I think this idea that Assad would be a part of any transitional government is a very sensitive point, because the opposition thinks that that'll just be used to give Assad undue influence in any transition to something else. And this was the case in Yemen when Saleh left. So there's a precedent for their concern.
You have about 10 seconds left. Talk to me about a timeline where we could actually see something follow through. Do you think this is anytime soon in the near future?
Well, the conference they're talking about in a couple weeks or a month, but that doesn't mean the whole thing is going to be solved by then. In fact, that's probably only the beginning of any negotiation. So it could be quite a while, and we could see a lot more people die, unfortunately.
All right, Ivan Eland, we appreciate your insight as always.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show.